Every rugby era explained. Before the global stadiums, the blood-stained jerseys, and the bone-rattling tackles, rugby was just a chaotic moment at a British boarding school. But that one reckless decision to pick up the ball and run ignited a sport that would split nations, divide classes, and eventually conquer the world. This is the story of rugby. Not just the game, but its eras. How it grew, fractured, evolved, and redefined what it means to fight for every inch. You think American football is wild? Rugby was doing it with no pads, no helmets, and twice the grit over 150 years ago. The founding era, 1823 to 1870, the legend goes like this: 1823, Rugby School, England. A kid named William Webb Ellis got bored during a football match, picked up the ball, and ran. Total chaos. But instead of punishment, that chaos turned into innovation. And just like that, a new sport was born: rugby. By 1845, the boys at Rugby School formalised the first written rules. No forward passes, tackles were brutal, the ball was oval. It looked nothing like soccer, and honestly, it barely looked like rugby today. But the DNA was there. Clubs began popping up across England. Matches were messy, violent, and disorganised, but they were electric. And by the late 1860s, there was too much momentum to ignore. The sport needed structure. In 1871, the Rugby Football Union, RFU, was founded to unify the chaos. Later that year, something huge happened. The first ever international match, England versus Scotland. Scotland won. And just like that, rugby became an international affair. The expansion era, 1871 to 1895. Once England gave rugby a framework, the rest of the world followed with remarkable speed. The British Empire exported more than colonial rule and commerce. They spread culture, and rugby became one of their most potent exports. It wasn't just a game, it was a tool of influence, a piece of Britain's identity planted across continents. By the late 1870s, rugby had firmly established itself in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and France. But in some places, it didn't just catch on, it took over. In New Zealand and South Africa, rugby became part of the national fabric, deeply tied to pride, politics, and identity. Boys grew up with a ball in hand. Entire towns shut down for matches. Meanwhile, back in Britain, the sport was exploding. Clubs were springing up weekly, matches drew bigger crowds, fierce rivalries, some friendly, some not, spread across cities and counties. But the game wasn't unified. Debates broke out over rules, style, and most of all, fairness. Who could play? Who could be paid? Was this still a gentleman's game, or was it becoming something else? By the 1890s, rugby had outgrown its rulebook. It wasn't just a game anymore. It was a battleground for class, culture, and the future of the sport. The Great Split. League versus Union, 1895 to 1945. By the late 19th century, rugby had evolved into more than just a sport. It had become a mirror of society's growing class tensions. In England, a stark divide emerged between the working-class North and the upper-class South. The key issue? Compensation. Northern players, many of whom missed work to compete, wanted broken-time payments to cover lost wages. But the Rugby Football Union, RFU, clinging to strict amateur ideals, flatly refused. In 1895, after years of disagreement, the standoff erupted. 22 northern clubs broke away from the RFU and formed the Northern Rugby Football Union, which would later become Rugby League. This new version of the sport introduced major changes. Teams were reduced from 15 to 13 players. Scrums were de-emphasised in favour of the play-the-ball rule, and the gameplay was streamlined to be quicker, more open, and more appealing to spectators. Rugby Union, meanwhile, stayed true to its roots, remaining amateur, upholding traditional rules, and continuing to appeal primarily to elites. But the split wasn't just about rules or gameplay. It symbolised a deep cultural divide that would shape rugby for over a century, embedding identity, class and philosophy into every tackle and try. The international expansion and the World Wars, 1895 to 1945. Despite the internal divisions, rugby's popularity was spreading across the globe. The British Empire played a significant role in introducing the sport to its colonies. By the early 20th century, rugby had taken root in countries like New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, and France. International competitions began to flourish. The Home Nations Championship, featuring England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, started in 1883 and evolved into the Five Nations with the inclusion of France in 1910. These tournaments laid the groundwork for the international rugby scene. However, the outbreak of World War I in 1914 brought a halt to many sporting events. Rugby players enlisted en masse, and the sport suffered significant losses. The interwar period saw a resurgence, but the advent of World War II in 1939 once again disrupted international play. During these tumultuous times, rugby served as a unifying force, offering a sense of normalcy and camaraderie amidst global upheaval. Post-war rebuilding and the seeds of global competition, 1945 to 1987. After the devastation of World War II, rugby, like many aspects of society, sought to rebuild and redefine itself. The post-war period saw a resurgence in international matches, with traditional rivalries reignited and new ones formed. Tours between the southern and northern hemispheres became more frequent, fostering a sense of global camaraderie and competition. In the southern hemisphere, the All Blacks of New Zealand and the Springboks of South Africa emerged as dominant forces, while in the north, teams like England, France, and Wales continued to develop their own legacies. The sport's popularity grew, and the idea of a global tournament began to gain traction. Despite initial resistance from traditionalists who feared that a World Cup would undermine the sport's amateur ethos, the momentum was undeniable. The desire to crown a true world champion and bring together the best teams on a single stage became a driving force in the rugby community. The inaugural Rugby World Cup and the road to professionalism, 1987 to 1995. In 1987, the dream became a reality. The first Rugby World Cup was co-hosted by New Zealand and Australia, featuring 16 teams from around the globe. The tournament was a resounding success, with the All Blacks defeating France 29-9 in the final at Eden Park, Auckland, to become the inaugural world champions. The success of the 1987 World Cup paved the way for subsequent tournaments. In 1991, the World Cup expanded, with matches held across England, France, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. Australia emerged victorious, defeating England 12-6 in the final at Twickenham. However, it was the 1995 Rugby World Cup in South Africa that had the most profound impact. This tournament marked South Africa's return to international rugby following the end of apartheid. The final, held at Ellis Park in Johannesburg, saw the Springboks defeat the All Blacks 15-12 in extra time. The image of President Nelson Mandela wearing a Springbok jersey, presenting the Webb Ellis Cup to Captain Francois Pienaar, became an enduring symbol of unity and reconciliation. The 1995 World Cup also signalled the end of rugby union's amateur era. Just months after the tournament, the International Rugby Board, now World Rugby, declared the sport open to professionalism, forever changing the landscape of rugby. The professional revolution and global expansion, 1995 to 2010. In 1995, everything changed. For over a century, rugby union clung to its amateur values. No salaries, no sponsors, no superstars. But the success of the 1995 World Cup in South Africa pushed the sport into a new era. That final, where the Springboks edged the All Blacks in front of a divided but hopeful nation, was more than a win. It was a turning point. And just months later, the sport officially turned professional. The impact was immediate. Players went full-time. Training ramped up. Tactics evolved. And the money came flooding in. Broadcasters, sponsors, and fans all wanted a piece of the action. With professionalism came polish and pressure. Rugby became faster, tougher, and far more intense. Competitions like Super Rugby and the Tri-Nations exploded in popularity, showcasing brutal physicality and near-flawless execution. The Southern Hemisphere led the charge. New Zealand, South Africa, and Australia didn't just play rugby, they dominated it. The All Blacks, especially, were something else. Their pace, precision, and legacy made them feel untouchable. But the rest of the world wasn't just watching, they were catching up. Northern Hemisphere resurgence and tactical evolution, 2010 to 2020. By the early 2000s, the balance of power started to shift. The North had learned, adapted, and evolved. Countries like England, Ireland, and Wales weren't just showing up anymore, they were winning. Coaching became more sophisticated. Game plans got tighter. Defense became an art form. It wasn't just about raw strength anymore, it was about control, strategy, depth. The 2015 World Cup was proof. Yes, New Zealand took the title, but the global gap was closing fast. Argentina made a deep run. Japan pulled off the biggest upset in tournament history by beating South Africa. Northern teams were grinding out wins through discipline and execution. The Southern Flash still dazzled, but the North had brought grit and game IQ to the fight. The global game and the tech boom, 2020 to 2025. Then came the 2020s, and rugby jumped into the digital age. The game started leaning into technology. Data tracking, performance analytics, and TMO reviews became part of the matchday experience. Some fans loved it, others didn't. But one thing was clear: the sport was evolving again, fast. At the same time, rugby was growing in places it had never truly thrived before. The US made serious moves. Japan went from novelty to threat. Spain and Chile started knocking on the big boys' doors. Women's rugby surged. Rugby Sevens, fueled by its Olympic stage, brought in new fans and fresh energy. The game wasn't just about England, New Zealand, and South Africa anymore. It was everywhere. The 2023 World Cup in France brought it all together. In one of the most intense finals in tournament history, South Africa edged New Zealand 12-11. The Springboks became the first team ever to win back-to-back titles away from home. It wasn't clean, it wasn't flashy, but it was classic Springboks. Gritty, gutsy, and absolutely fearless. The red card to All Blacks captain Sam Cane only added to the tension. In the end, it was power, patience, and just enough poise that sealed South Africa's fourth title. Now in 2025, rugby stands at the edge of something new. It's bigger, faster, and smarter than ever. But it's also more unpredictable. The game is changing again, and nobody knows what the next era will look like. But one thing's for sure: rugby never stays still. From its muddy schoolyard birth to packed stadiums and global broadcasts, this sport has always found a way to evolve. And the next phase, it's already on its way. What are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.